Focus on Liberia. My name is Dennis Jar, and we are broadcasting from Atlanta, Georgia. In tonight's edition, we're going to be looking at public sector governance, understanding public service. With me to discuss this is Mr. Ahmed Sirleaf. Mr. Sirleaf, welcome to Focus on Liberia.
Thank you, Dennis. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to be on your platform tonight.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sirleaf is a doctoral student. Big book. He has experience in various disciplines, various things about policy, international development, the rule of law, and everything in between. He's worked with USAID, he's worked with the implementing partners in Liberia, with donors, and you can tell it all. Mr. Sirleaf is here tonight to discuss understanding public service, that is, understanding public governance. Mr. Sirleaf, again, welcome to Focus on Liberia. We are glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I've been an avid follower of your platform, and I've appreciated the quality of some of your guests you've brought here and the various topics you've tackled concerning Liberia. So thank you for your public service.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Sirleaf, also, our interaction goes way back to late self days when we used to go back and forth.
Absolutely. Yes. Right.
So we're going to be discussing statecraft and all kinds of words we're going to be throwing in here tonight. So our topic is public sector governance, or understanding public service. And when we say public service, that tells me that there is also private service, maybe. But let's get this started. When we say public service, what does that mean? But before we get into that, I want to welcome all our viewers across the globe, those that are watching tonight, and even those who are going to watch later on YouTube. Understanding public service, or what is public service governance. Mr. Sirleaf, what is public service?
Thank you, Dennis. And once again, public service, the name sort of is indicative and is suggestive. But public service is let me start with what is not. It's not just one who gets in the business of working for government to collect paycheck. It's not one who comes to service to get for personal aggrandizement purposes or to get wealthy or rich. Public service is people who want to have a passion to work for the public sector, to provide, to utilize their service, their expertise, their training, their education to the service of others, all right, to provide a greater good for the common good. In other words, they're drawn to service for a cause, not necessarily for the benefit of it. In terms of, specifically speaking to your question, public service, the simplest understanding that people easily often reference is those in government, right? So a service in the service of one's country, one state, in the political sector, in the public sector, government employees, for example, police officers, fire service people, health sector workers, teachers, doctors, educators. Those are all public servants. Those are people who are called to serve for the greater good than themselves.
So public service, meaning, what's about private? If you're in private, is there any private service, or if you're in private, you're there for the money? So absolutely.
Actually, the private sector should work hands in hands with the public sector. There is private service. You can decide to establish your own company, your own firm. Like you have your platform here, your own business, right? You engage in the marketplace and let market forces determine things, right? Whereas you see a particular opportunity, a demand for a particular service, goods and services, and you say, I have this training, I have this expertise, or I have some capital or some resources, I want to start a business. And like our people who are selling down Waterside or on Randall Street, or these are private sector actors, people who run private businesses. These are private sector actors. Now, yes, and therefore they're also serving the public, but from the private perspective, for profit, for personal gain.
Okay, and another word we say public service or public sector governance. So they come in the word governance. So what is public sector governance?
Thank you. Well, that is a loaded terminology, right? That has multitudes of subsectors and sub gradations of of definition or concerns. Public sector governance essentially is those who are concerned with running the affairs of state. Those who are concerned with utilizing the resources of the state for the greater good of the people of that particular country. What they call the social contract between those who are elected and their political appointees, and those we call civil servants who may not be political appointees, but who, by virtue of their qualifications and their education and talent and experience, are deployed in the service of their country, of their community, of their institutions that are providing a wide variety of services to the benefit of the public good. Those are public servants, right, and civil servants. But in terms of public sector governance, this is the ability to understand your resources and to understand the things of state. How do you measure state human capital, natural resources, and other endowments of state with discipline, and be able to put in place structures, policies, systems to what a particular impact, and attract people with the right skills, right education, and right service to come to the core of public service. So in terms of governance, a professor of mine equated statecraft or public sector governance to a symphony, right? A symphony orchestra. You are the conductor of the symphony. This symphony has multiple players and it has multiple instruments, right? So you have various instruments of states, various actors. You have elected officials. You have appointed political officials. You have people who are in mid-level managerial role by virtue of their qualification and their expertise. Perhaps they came to this enterprise as a result of the some civil service examination and qualification determination. Now they're here. So then how do you manage efficiently all of the actors, all of the resources for the good of the people? To do so, how do you understand what impact you want to create? What are the problems that you are seeking to address, and why? When do you want to do that? What resources do you have to do that? So your ability to understand that as that symphony conductor, right? You are producing a sound of harmony, right? In a very disciplined way. But these are different sounds that are coordinated together to produce beautiful music. So for instance, if you are a president, a prime minister, or a head of government, right? How do you attract talented people, put together a cabinet that is disciplined, that is competent, that is educated, who then hire mid-level managers who know what they're doing, who know their sectors, and somehow compensate them in a fair way that you're able to retain those talents to produce the greatest good for your population. To do that, your ability to understand the context, your ability to know who to hire and to do what, when, and why, to bring the greater good to your population, that is the domain of statecraft. That is the domain of public sector governance. There are a lot of other things in between in technical areas that we could concern ourselves, or we could discuss if we have time. But in a broad sense of dabbling in this thing of public sector governance, I want to stop there.
Right. And thank you. As we still lay the premise here, and for those joining us, we are discussing understanding public service or we're talking about statecraft and public sector governance. At this time in the history of Liberia, why is this topic important, Mr. Sirleaf?
Well, it's very important because our country is at an inflection point. Our country will, at the rate at which it is going in terms of development, and again, that's another big terminology we can come around later on in terms of, economic modernization, our desire for economic and social cultural advancement, economic modernization, economic human development, in order to get our people out of poverty. I believe that we are at an inflection point. Either we grow or we don't grow. Either we get trapped in this, what they call the state capability trap, right? That we haven't figured out what capabilities do we need in order to make our country to grow and be able to get to, say, a middle income country level, where the vast majority of our people are out of poverty. In other words, people are able to afford to send their children to the schools of their choice. If they want to go to public school, the government is able to provide high quality public education. If the government is able to provide high quality health care delivery to the people, public transportation, electricity, parks and natural resources and so on, those things that are basic services to the population. On the other hand, there's the marketplace of competition, economic forces, so that when you're out of poverty, you have resources beyond your concern with your meager square meal per day. You are able then to make decisions for your family, right? In terms of, do I want to send my child to a private school? Do I want to go to a private hospital? Those things are there because we've been able to mash out what we have, our human capacity, the people we have, the resources we have, and attract others to come to our country to help us grow at a better and faster rate. It is important in terms of timing because Liberia is a youthful country. If you look at all the data, World Bank data will tell you, IMF data will tell you, our own LISTS, right? LISTS, Liberia Institute for Geostatistical Services. They do what they call a demographic health survey, household income and expenditure survey. They're looking at, individuals, households, their abilities to earn income and so on, what's happening in the economy at a micro level, at a macro level. Those data tell us that a vast majority of our population are people who are 35 and under, right? That tells you you have a population that you need to be able to grow. You need to be able to marshal your human capacity so that the country...
Mr. Sirleaf, before you even go there, I don't know if we are confusing this public service and politics, or what are the similarities? What's the difference? Because it looked like we seem to want something, but we don't know what it is. So how does politics come in this whole idea of public service or public sector governance?
Well, a good disciplined politician who knows why they're in politics is also a public servant, because they're there to advocate for policy options that will lead to specific policy objectives that will benefit their constituents and their constituencies, right? So politics is a good thing, but a good political governance can lead also to good economic governance, a good social cultural governance. By that, I mean, if we do our politics right, because every country, politics is about competition of ideas. You're putting forward your strategies as a politician or a political institution, saying my strategies are advanced and better than yours. If we deploy these strategies that are these ideas, then we will be able to move from point A to B. That's why I want to come to politics, right? And then you come to politics. You are in the political arena. Are you advocating for central government or federal government, depending on whatever the situation? For us in Liberia, central government to look at my constituencies, to bring development projects to my area because I represent them. That's being a public servant as a politician. However, politics is a separate domain. It's not the same as necessarily as a domain of public sector governance. Although, again, as I said, a good politician can provide good governance. Why? For instance, we elected our president, or we elect the president, right? This president is the symphony orchestra conductor who has the good wisdom and skills and wherewithal to assemble a competent and disciplined cabinet, to hire mid-level political appointees, and attract talents, and then come around, get people around the table through consensus or whatever other incentives, right, that will bring people around a particular agenda, policy agenda that the conductor wants to marshal for the good of their people. You do that, you are engaging in public sector governance. Meanwhile, you are a politician all at the same time.
Good. Now, so public sector governance. So governance remind me of the word government. So let's look at the two. You before the show, you mentioned that government is not governance. Let's look at government,
right,
and why government is not governance.
Government is a collection of people who are assembled in a particular nation state, in a particular geographic location with a defined population to look after the affairs of that state. Now, government is people, it's institutions, it's structures, right, that are put in place. And so that is a body of government. You can have a very bad government that is not governing, that does not understand governing, that is not disciplined, that is incompetent. You can have a government that is very competent, that understands the challenges ahead of it, that understands why the people have put them in a position of authority, right? Why the people have chosen them in a representative democracy as ours in Liberia to represent them, right? So we separate this whole idea of government, a body of people, from governing, because you can be a government, you can assemble very incompetent people, you can assemble very inexperienced people, very indisciplined people who are not governing, who know nothing about governance, who are not even willing to learn about government or governing, right? So that's government for you, right? In terms of governance, as I said in the beginning, is totally a different area of concern here. There are a number of characteristics of what we or realms or sectors of in terms of what we regard as governance. And what does it mean to have good governance, to have effective governance? So there are indicators. If you look at international government organizations or public international organizations like UN institutions, the World Bank, for instance, they have the worldwide governance indicator. They have human development indicators. There are various benchmarks and indicators that tell us that a particular country is governing well, right? For instance, what's the quality of your people, your government employees, your political public sector people? How effectively are you providing services to your population? How well do you know the problems that your population has, and then how do you segment these problems? What are the urgent problems that we must deal with? What are midterm problems that we must plan for, and long-range problems that we should do some analysis, try to understand and marshal resources at different points in time? So as you're governing, you're that symphony conductor, right? You're looking at every single player here in this orchestra. You are listening to various sounds, but your audience is looking at beautiful musical production. And that is governing for you. You look at economic governance, diplomatic governance. You look at what our foreign policy is, for instance. Our diplomats are they trained, formally educated, experienced people in the craft of diplomacy. Do they understand how to conduct complicated dialogues, how to negotiate, how to initiate conversation that will advance the domestic interest of their country? Do they have skills in conflict resolution and problem solving? Do they understand integrative and strategic thinking? All of these things, how do you relate to foreign governments, foreign organizations? You only do that when you know what the domestic problems are, when you know what diplomacy should do for your country. Why are you out there speaking for us and representing us, right? I mentioned to you about the tools of state. If you study strategic studies or public affairs, public policy, they'll talk about the DIME concept, D-I-M-E, right? You have diplomacy, information, military, and economics. Why do states use dime as the strategic instruments of state, right? They do so because diplomacy is important for you to advance your national security interest, to advance whatever your diplomatic goals are, to bring the good to your country. Information, you use information strategically. Is your information department properly telling the stories of policy implementation, of what the government is doing, how the government is doing? Do they have a communication strategy? Do they have internal communication strategies and programs? Are the departments talking to one another, the institutions, the agencies? Do your employees understand the objective, the mandate of your institution? Is communication flowing from down up to managers, helping the managers to tell the stories, right? Because most times it's managers, ministers, deputy ministers who tell the stories and speak for our institutions. How's communication in the institution? How's communication between two government institutions, so that if they're working, say, on similar portfolio, how do they not duplicate functions? Yeah. How do they try to synergize and coordinate work so that you can save money? Out of that, you can use military and then economics, which is what we all know. Recently, we've been making a lot of noises in our country about the state of our economy, right? Whether our economy is growing or it's not growing. What are our financial institutions liquid and they're solid? Whether we should print money or not? How's our macro economy working? Those things that concern monetary policy of the central bank, in terms of pricing, in terms of working with commercial banks, ensuring the circulation of money in the economy, or is it fiscal policy, where the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning is looking at public expenditure, domestic revenue mobilization, government spending, contracts, government debt. All of those things is big. These economists who come and speak big book to us, they're talking about all of those things. But what they're really saying is public sector governance. Are we governing well? Are we engaging in economic governance? And what are the tools of economic governance? How do we attract foreign direct investment, what they call FDI, foreign direct investment? How do we attract domestic investment? Because people who sell down waterside, or those who have shops all around the country, pimping boys and girls, who whatever is happening in our economy, those are also domestic investors. If they have capital, they have that money. In terms of the way the environment is, the political environment, the public sector environment, that will make you want to keep your money in the bank or not. If it's stable, you say, all right, this country looks like things are going in the right direction, and therefore things are looking happy. People are happy. You know, I'm going to keep my money here, and I'll keep investing. So we often forget that we actually do have domestic investors, not just FDI, foreign direct investment, right? So the point here is you can do economic governance, you can engage in political governance, you engage in diplomatic governance, but the key here is to be able to have people who understand these things, that they're in the business of running state for what we call the common good of the people.
So it means all this that you're talking is good stuff, right? But I'm thinking, where does it start? You know, how do we get this going? How do we plan for government success? How do we plan for a government that will govern so for the common good of the people? What do we need to do?
Well, that's a very good and big question, because this is where the crux of the matter is. When you talk to policy analysts and policy technical people, they're concerned about planning. How do you do planning? Planning suggests that you have a problem. You have a public problem. There's a professor at the Harvard Center for International Development at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, Professor Len Pritchett, that talks about the state capability traps, which means what capacity does our country have? What are the capabilities? Do we understand our capabilities? Our people's abilities to understand problems, to put problems on the policy agenda. Policy agenda means how do we initiate a solution search for a particular problem we've identified? How do we even know that this is the right problem? You ask someone, so why are students performing poorly? The person might say, well, because we don't have trained teachers. You say, okay, so what is the solution for trained teachers? So let's train teachers. They've lacked everything, and they think that their solution is their problem, right? You gave me various options of how we could have, the high quality education. What they're really telling you is we want to be able to educate our people in a very high quality way. There's more to educating than just quality teachers, right? So there are a lot in between there. That is a realm of planning. Okay, put a particular issue, again, land purchases, wicked public problem. Put that wicked public problem such as malaria, tropical diseases that bother our people, things of hunger, poverty, and inclusive economic growth. We put on the policy agenda. Then we move to what they call the formulation process. The policy formulation is where you're actually doing the planning in terms of deconstructing that problem, bringing people around in local ownership, so that those that are the stakeholders for this particular problem. Again, stakeholders, the policy term in terms of who has resources to help address this problem, who has the expertise or interest in this problem, who are affected by the problem. And all of those people are stakeholders, local citizens, elected officials who are interested in providing services to their people so they get re-elected, people who want to be able to have a stable environment so they can thrive economically. All of those people are stakeholders. So you put this piece of problem on what they call the policy agenda. You work on formulation. Formulation is the actual planning now. And so you do various analysis, such as cultural impact analysis, to understand whether the traditional people will be aligned, will they be on board, will they reject this particular policy. And then you do what they call binding constraint analysis. What are the real problems that have been impeding progress in this area? So as you can see, there are a lot of technical people who will be working on various pieces to make sure we fully understand this problem before we advance it to the next level, which is the legitimization level. In that realm, you're going to the political arena. What is the cabinet, the legislature, whether it's some particular agency, you have to have that buy-in so that they can approve and sanction that policy option to advance to the next level, which is implementation. So I call that implementing individually, but succeeding collectively. So if you succeed, the government succeeds, the ministry succeeds, the government succeeds, the president succeeds, right? If you fail to plan, to think about the problem, to really be disciplined about it, that's collective action failure. The people suffer, the government doesn't do well, public sector governance does not happen. So planning is key. That is the reason why I try to emphasize to pay attention to planning, not just jump, do knee-jerk things that have not been fully studied. We don't have the evidence to show that we've understood the problems properly, and therefore now are able to figure out the policy solutions to advance on this particular set of problems that we're trying to address.
And sometimes we even kind of find the solution before even diagnosing the problem.
Absolutely.
And in order to do this planning, and even as the implementation phase is going on, there must be some form of coordination, right? Because you talk about ministers and everybody else. Mm-hmm. So what is that intra-government communication and coordination? What does it look like?
Okay, thank you. So when you talk to private sector people, companies, even here in the US and other countries, in Liberia, I've talked to friends who are in the private sector, right? You want to be able to have your institution to have a standardized communication system. So you have a process, internal communication process. Then you want to be able to have platforms that will enable you to communicate. So for example, you have a department. Does this ministry or this government sector have a mainframe somewhere? Do you have where everybody can access public information in that ministry to make that work more efficient? Or are you working on Gmail? Nobody knows. What's the memoranda process? How do you communicate between two offices, between lower level officials who are working on technical matters and the minister? How do you communicate with the other agents? So that's intra. Intra just means inside the agency. Do your employees understand what is it that they're working on? how the managers are advocating on their behalf and for them, how they communicate with the public. So you have internal communication processes that you should have and people, and then external communication people who are helping communicate with other agencies and the central system, so that they know you are implementing well, and if you're encountering problems, how do you pause and reflect and course correct? You know, how do you monitor, evaluate, and then adapt and plan for, because if something fails, you should be able to understand, to know that it's failed. So there are all kinds of technical processes involved in that, right? But the bottom line is you should know that you should have an internal communication system that is effective, that works well, a system that communicates with other agencies, and also tell the government story to the Liberian people, be transparent about it, so that people are able to actually engage the government when something is not going in their interest.
In that coordination, you give a beautiful analogy that like a symphony orchestra,
right,
where the president is the conductor.
Absolutely.
So from what you are explaining, the president should be that conductor.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What tools does the president need to do that?
The president has to understand the music he wants to produce. So you have a 2-hour performance. You practice for 20 hours. You do 20 hours of recitals. You bring these people who have different instruments. Is the instrument working? Is it broken? Do we need a new one? Do we need to repair it? What sound is it producing, right? Is it going to work in harmony with the rest of the instruments? Will they produce the sound we're looking for? Because your audience is the Liberian people, citizen-state relations, right? So that the people are not looking at the production and all the planning, all the rehearsals, all the recitals, and what's happening behind the scenes. What they should look for is the good that is coming to them. That social contract. The government is building roads. The government is providing high quality healthcare. Nurses and doctors are taking pay. They're well paid and trained. Our teachers are doing well. The schools, the infrastructure, if there's capital projects, what's happening? So that president has to know which player he or she wants. In our case, what players he wants. Are they good at that instrument? Do they understand their function? Are they working in coordination of the rest of the team here? Because again, we're working as a team, but we're succeeding individually so we can succeed as a team. If the president brings in players who don't understand music, who don't understand a particular instrument, that's not what they're used to. That's a misalignment, okay? That's one level. Those are just the processes and understanding the people and all of that and what problems you want to solve. There's another critical area. It's called your authorizing environment. What is your authorizing environment, okay? So it could be there's a particular minister who is passionate about this problem. They want to do something about this problem, but the rest of the government is not passionate about this problem. Is that minister the authorizer? Can they sanction that work? How are they communicating that to the lower level? Are they bringing that to the cabinet? And how are they presenting that issue to the cabinet, right? Are they presenting this to the president, who is the conductor, so that the president sees that this particular problem, he can authorize it? So that minister can go ahead. That minister then can authorize others who are beneath him or her, right? And then you have the external authorizers, like the external forces in the public domain. The traditional leaders, for instance, who some things are matters of values, of principles, of customs and culture, and they don't want you to touch it. So you have to also seek that authorization. Authorization in terms of just bringing them on board, explaining to them in ways that they understand, and they will sanction, they will legitimize that particular project. So coordination is a thing of really looking at processes, looking at institutions, resources, marshaling all the resources, the human resources, the financial resources, whether it's actual cash and budget allocation or is some kind of credit process that you're working on. The public sector person really has to be somebody who is very skilled, who understands, has the experience, or is at least willing to learn how to play that particular instrument, because they are in an orchestra, and the orchestra must produce a very harmonious sound. It's for the audience to enjoy the music. If the president doesn't conduct well, is not willing to conduct well, you have a very chaotic performance.
Right. And still staying with that music analogy is in physics they say any irregular sign then it's called what? Noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're seeing some of that. But let's use, for instance, like the PAPD, because you talk about that coordination, you talk about the president conducting.
Right.
So in that, we have to monitor, there's success tracking, okay, corrective actions plan. Is everybody delivering? So let's use the PAPD as an example to see how the various pieces are moving and how the conductor is conducting this orchestra.
Okay, thank you. So I was in Liberia, and as I mentioned to you before, for 5-6 years, I worked for a major international donor government. I interacted with the government of Liberia. I was in a very privileged position where I was in the donor community, managing money and working with the government to identify their needs and to align donor strategies and objectives of the government needs and development plans, right? And then I got out of that, and then I started dabbling in the Liberian government space to see how our people are really working, because I've seen it from outside. I've been across the table. Now I really want to come and see how people think and do things. Coordination is the PAPD rather. It's a beautiful policy document. I've seen it. I mean, I don't know how much studies were done to inform what we have on paper, but it is in the people focus. It's called the 4 pillars. The first pillar says power to the people. Power to the people is poverty driven. That's where the poor comes from, right? That means a vast majority of our people are poor, and our government is hell bent on reducing this poverty by a certain percentage. Although the PAPD uses some language that I don't necessarily agree with, right? They say, oh, our country is rich with human capital and natural resources, which is true, but it's relatively poor because we have not been able to marshal the resources. And then there's another pillar that talks about the economy and jobs and peace and stability and so on. So it's a very beautiful document. Then when you come to the evaluation section, to me, it doesn't give me enough meat. Although there's a structure, there's a high-level steering committee headed by the president that replaces previous government's policy plans and how they were doing things, right? And so they have their own structure. Ideally, if you follow that structure, things should relatively work from the top. But when you go to the bottom to dig deeper and read the PAPD a little closely with a policy analyst lens, and put that cap in thinking and planning, public sector cap on, I think there are some gaps that need to be fixed. So, for example, the monitoring they talk about, right? I don't see, and some of my friends in government will come at me for this, and that's fine, because we're all engaging in a dialogue in the public square to be able to contribute to the advancement of our country here. Yes. So there are areas where you could clearly define targets that each ministry, agency, and responsible party to meet our time. How do you monitor performance? How do you evaluate performance? And then, so what is the adaptive management plan? That means, so what if things are not going as we planned? So we experienced some shock. We didn't expect the coronavirus pandemic to hit, right? So it hit us. We were recovering from Ebola shock. Now we have corona pandemic shock. So what shock absorbing system do we have here to be able to pause, reflect, and then adapt and replan so that we can loop our progress back into planning? So what I call planning for planning, right? I don't really see that clearly defined, and maybe somebody will present that to me or will call my attention to how that works. They always tell you, Sirleaf, you're not in government, so you don't understand the nuances and the inner workings, but we're actually working, but like my father used to say, a success doesn't hide, right? I mean, it shows. If you're doing well, we, the public, all we want to see, we have the social contract with you, the government. We want to be able to see that your actions are reflective in the benefits we accrue in terms of good public goods and services. But if we're not seeing that, and we see that the environment is unstable, the economy is not performing in our own little understanding of things, we can feed our families properly, then we will say maybe our government is not doing this well. And so all these things we're talking about, coordination, communication, the technical stuff, it really boils down to how do we implement? Because governance is about implementation of policy options that you've identified to give you a particular specific policy outcome for the good, greater good, to produce greater good for the greater majority of the people. If you're not producing that good, and the greater majority of the people are not experiencing positive vibes from your performance as that conductor or as that specific player in the orchestra, then we don't see musical harmony. And what gives us that, the anchor to that, is that policy document that has various signposts that should let us know how well we're doing. So the monitoring evaluation has to be strengthened, and the pause and reflect, and how do we loop back into planning? How do we course correct? I think that area could be strengthened a little better.
I agree. Ladies and gentlemen, if you just joining us, this is Focus on Liberia. We are discussing understanding public service. My guest, Mr. Ahmed K. Sirleaf. Mr. Sirleaf is a doctoral student of CIDE. He will explain to you what that is, and an international development practitioner. Mr. Sirleaf, anytime we talk of public service, it is very easy for our attention to run on the executive branch.
Right.
We also have our lawmakers.
Right.
Okay. So let's look at the role of the legislature.
Okay.
In governing or in governance in Liberia.
I like that question, because a lot of times our people don't see the legislature as a governing institution. They like to talk about legislating, lawmaking, which is legislating, oversight. Okay, all of that is governing. You know, say, why do legislative committees call specific public official who is concerned with a particular piece of policy, or you know, to come and explain something, to answer questions, right? They may see that just as oversight responsibility, but that is actually governing, because the legislature is the first branch of government under our Republican representative government system, right? They are the ones who can approve or vote down our president's legislative agenda. They're the ones who should advocate for their constituencies and advocate for policy benefits for their constituencies, so that government then can engage in budgetary allocation for those various. In America, they call it pork barrel projects, right? So you're the legislator. Your job is now to take money out of your pocket to hire yellow machines to build roads or to build bridges, engage in capital investment and capital projects. I disagree. I don't see that necessarily as the function of a particular legislator. That is a misunderstanding of your role of governance. A legislator should be there to try to look at what are the vexing problems that their constituents or constituencies are dealing with, are grappling with. And then collectively, as an institution, what's the direction in which the country is heading, so that they make laws that are consistent with the Constitution, because it's the organic and the supreme law of the land, right? Within that, they enact legislations that are in the best interest of their people and hold the executive branch accountable, because the executive branch's role is to implement you know, a particular policy that the legislature has just okayed, has just approved. And so if it's not going well, you call them, make them do it. But your job is not to go pay money out of pocket to engage in a particular specific concrete development project. Now, they'll say we have the Liberia Agency for Community Empowerment list, which is a pork barrel project that the government has to implement legislative programs. If that was working really well, you know, that we don't have this rent-seeking, and this other fancy term for corruption that economists use, right? That we don't have a system where I'm the legislator I create my own bogus company, and Dennis Jar is the head of Liz. I come and say, my man, I know my district, you got $50,000, $500,000 for me, but that money, I give the contract to my company. You don't engage in proper procurement. So all of these things are not standardized, right? You don't engage in competition to attract the best company, the best individual that has the skills, the experience to carry out this job. You direct the resources to your friend, or to your own institution, and then you build something that doesn't last, doesn't work. That is not legislating. That is not governing. That is not providing oversight. My argument is legislators, individual legislators, not everybody. So I see a few that try really to model good legislative functions, right? What a legislator does. I'm not going to call them. There are a few that I follow, but I'm sorry to say that our legislature as a whole could really engage and benefit from some institutional building, some institutional lining and understanding. I'm not saying they don't know what they're doing, they don't know their road. Sirleaf say we don't know what we're doing here, right? But we all can benefit from learning from others and be able to bring it back home, And what I see us doing a lot is, again, what Lance Pritchard calls, it's a big term that comes from natural sciences called isomorphic mimicry. So we mimic others. You come to America, you see something that is functioning, is government, it has,
call that word again.
Isomorphic mimicry. So
Okay.
Isomorphism, right? Isomorphism is like two things look exactly the same. You look at them, there's no difference. But one of them is the real deal. The other one is not exactly. Or that we just mimic what others are doing. But we don't have the capability as a state. We have the trappings of capability. We make it look like we're doing it. And we're not actually doing it. Why? Because we don't know how. We don't have the trained people, the experience as a state to do it. Donors do that to us a lot. World Bank and IMF and so on, they come and say, you got to do this. You have to pass this legislation because we want you to address this. Because they have money, we agree to do it. Right. But we don't have the capacity to actually, in a sustainable way, implement that particular thing that they want us to do. Our legislature does that a lot. And, and it doesn't help because the country is not going anywhere. And they continue to engage in these kinds of mismatch, missed opportunities to govern and really help the executive to do their job and therefore bring the greatest good to our people.
So when it comes to this idea of statecraft, right?
Right.
It's not only the executive, it's not only the legislators. We also have politicians, political parties. They have a role to play, don't they?
They do, of course. You see, political parties should really be institutions that engage in institutionalism. There are institutions without institutionalism. What do I mean? They will say, oh, we are party XYZ. Okay, here's our political leader. And we have all these young people engaging slogans, they sing behind us and we make some noises. But deep down, when you look at them, what is the institutionalism here? The institutionalism should be, how do we as an institution that says we are a political party that wants to be a government one day, right? It's about competition of strategies and ideas. These opposition political parties should have ideas that today, if you put them in office, they are able to run a government and govern well and produce the greatest good to the greatest number of our people. So it's not just about political slogan. It's about carefully looking at the problems, carefully looking at opportunities, and collaborating with the government. You'll see that in other countries, right? It doesn't mean when you are in opposition, you just wait and keep criticizing, you react, you're reactionary. No, that's not institutionalism. Institutionalism, for example, these young people that we have programs that are training them. Because tomorrow there will be our bureaucrats, there will be our public servants, right? And so that we have programs and system that trains them, that builds the institution, that institutions that partners with other political institutions around the region, around the world, to bring good to our country, to attract investment, to advance ideas that are competitive, that the government will be hard pressed to deny that, listen, this is really good. You know, though it comes from that party that is now in office, we have to work with them. All of them, they're all stakeholders in the political space, in the political governance space. If you make noise or you engage in some gamemanship that, again, you know, gender people will not like me for saying that, but you engage in an act that creates a lot of noises and sense of instability, then you're also creating instability in the economic statecraft space, right? It's not just for the ruling government, the ruling party alone. So all of us collectively have to create an environment where our country is perceived as stable, and it is truly stable. That our country is on the forward march. It looks like it's going in the right direction, and therefore we're able to go out there and advocate for the resources for the good of our country. If not, again, just a ruling party or just a sitting president's role, because we're all citizens, right? And the citizenship has privileges, it has rights, but it also has responsibilities and obligations.
So you mentioned maybe 3 or 4 times about the young people. What we see here is we see the young people, both pro-government and opposition, with the berets, and they are moving in the street, what others refer to as the militarization of the youth.
Yes, and I agree. I think the youth is being militarized. You know, the chief of staff, I know him. You mentioned that just recently, and I agree with him 100%. This whole notion that you have to be calling somebody general, you have to be, you know, militant this, militant that. I don't know. This comes to these slogans that we borrow from South Africa apartheid years. We're not engaged in that kind of political revolutionary struggle. You know, that's not what's happening here. We should be molding these young people, preparing them to be competent, able, disciplined, future leaders and adults that will soon be. Some of them are already young adults. Sometimes we say youth is 35 in Liberia, right? And these are so grown men and women. But the culture that we engender by these kinds of attitude, where, you know, you put berets on everybody's head and everybody dresses in party colors, and this looks like, say, it's some military environment. It just doesn't all go well, because then it creates a sense of fragility, a sense of instability that doesn't just permeate abroad, but at home too. I talk about the home investors, right? People who have business interests in the country, who are there, who are doing things, they hold things back. You know, right now, people are holding Liberian dollars. It's not like the money is not there. The money is there, but it's not flowing in the economy because investors don't think that the environment, you know, I should be releasing my money and getting invested in new ventures, right? So youth are the on top asset, human capital for our country. I think that we should be both opposition institutions, ruling government institutions should be engaging in programs that will train these young people. If you have to create opportunities because people have different levels. Some people are able to do academic learning and training. And I'm not saying all of them not in college or in high school, they're not in school of some sort. They may be, but I think that we're not focusing on enabling them so that they're able to take the mantle of things and be competent and disciplined leaders and technocrats. And there's too much noise, and noise doesn't augur well. Even for economic development, it doesn't augur well for economic governance, for social-cultural governance, and for diplomatic governance.
You mentioned another thing, diplomatic. I want to get to that, but are we not putting some responsibility on these youth as well?
We are. We should. We are, because listen, when, you know, I mean, some of us came of age when there was conflict in our country, and we were in refugees in other people's countries. We were hungry to go to school. We were trying all kinds of things. We were chasing education, right? And so we could have easily derailed. We could have easily just been knocked off our feet and not do and engage in some unwholesome activities, and today what would have become of us, right? So young people, you also have to look at yourself, because the country will be bequeathed to you. So what kind of country do you want, and how prepared are you to inherit that country? All right. So the mindset and behavior culture, that's where things really should be, right? So what preparation do I need? I have to be true with myself and do introspection, look inside of me. So what skills do I lack? If your English can't even line up, your verb and subject, you don't know. You say the president have, the government have. And these are supposed to be educated people. If you say things that you just speak English, but then to the ears of well-trained ears and people that we're engaging with to come to our country to work with us so we can grow our country, they will view you with suspicion. And so how you address that, you tackle the youth, tackle the kids that are in the elementary school, yes, and work through the system, create all kinds of opportunities that will lead to, for example, light manufacturing activities, spur growth, train these people, those who will be able to go through academic and become the doctors and the lawyers and whatnot, they will do that. But a vast majority of our youth that have been militarized, that sing behind people, sing, but what is on the university campus or in a political party headquarters or someplace, I think that it is a bad culture, a very bad culture that we have to get away from. And so that's something that we should look at. We don't talk about it a lot, and it is really worrying because when I volunteer teach at the University of Liberia when I was working for USA. The whole time I was in the country for 6 years or so, I saw a lot of young people come to my classes who had graduated from college, one of the universities in town. You ask them, so I studied sociology and management, political science and economics and so on. But honestly, they're not even a college material because they don't know anything about college level research and citation and documentation and writing and anything like that. So there are all kinds of things that we have to do. During the war years, a lot of these young people were kids and they were born during the came of age when the conflict ended, and so they didn't have the chance to go to formal school, right? So we can blame them for everything. But when you know yourself and you see educated people around you, how successful they are, how well they're performing, I think the onus is on you as well to say, listen, I think I should find a way to educate myself so I can be like Dennis one day.
And tap into this guy. I want to bring on our viewers now for their comments, but one last thing I want to touch on, I want you to touch on, is about our foreign policy, because this whole idea of statecraft is not just inside Liberia.
No.
It's diplomacy as well. So let's look at both inward and outward diplomatic governance.
Okay. So when the Sirleaf administration was in office, particularly the first term, I was very critical of them because, and some of the officials were explaining to me, my man, our country has been broken down. We've been labeled as pariah state and failed state, so we have to project this image that Liberia is open again for business. We're back. It was really a diplomacy that was projecting outward. We were there to please the Bretton Woods system. We were there to please the Americans, the Europeans, so that they could see that we are a nation state again, open for business, which was good. But domestically, you see, any prudent foreign policy, it is a domestic policy. Your foreign policy should be anchored on your domestic policy. What do I mean? You craft a particular foreign policy direction so that it brings the greatest good again to your people, so that it advances your strategic national interest. What is that strategic national interest? It is a domestic interest. Okay, so my argument is Liberian diplomats can do diplomacy inward, inside Liberia as well. You're accountable to the Liberian people. Explain to them what is our foreign policy agenda, what is Liberia known for. Where we are right now with the pandemic, coronavirus, diplomacy has suffered a lot. Everybody's behind their camera on Zooms and Zoom meetings, and our diplomats are now able to get out there, to go to conferences, to go to meetings, and talk and negotiate on the sidelines of major diplomatic conferences. We all know that, right? That's something that is across the globe that is happening. However, I don't know. I go on Foreign Affairs website. I try to see something. They got something, but it has to be focused on advancing, for instance, the PAPD, on advancing the power to the people, reducing poverty, getting up out of poverty at a certain, a percentage in a certain period of time. So a foreign policy that you engage in a statecraft way. And what do I mean by that? Understand that diplomacy is a realm of trained and educated, experienced people who are engaging and representing our country and projecting the image of our country outside, who are able to engage in very complex dialogues, complex negotiations, and sometimes conflict resolution skills where you de-escalating things or you escalating things, right? So that you are able to sell your country, to ally with some people, break away from others, all for the greatest good of the advancement of your domestic policy. And so the statecraft, there are various subcategories I spoke about earlier, right? Diplomacy is the number 1 tool of state diplomacy. Why? Because it concerns of international affairs, international relations, foreign relations. So we participate in the ECOWAS region as a respected member state. We participate in the AU as a respected member who is contributory, because Liberia was there at the table at the founding of all these institutions, including 1945 in San Francisco, the United Nations. So then, what have we done with diplomacy? What are we doing with our diplomatic efforts to help advance our domestic agenda?
And that really somewhere that I wish we have time to even deal with that more, because what we've seen in the past, because of this dependency, we always want to receive, right? So yes. Even as you even mentioned earlier, when a foreign body comes and says, this is what I want, and because they have the money, we do whatever they say.
Right.
They are going back to the Sirleaf years. Even the idea to merge finance and planning was something that came from outside. Even the PRS is somewhere, the bridge education that Minister Werner trying to, I want to say, impose on the people to supplant. And how do you call that again? The mimicry, isomorphic
mimicry. So yeah. Okay. So let me say, mimicry is sometimes, what are you mimicking? That's the question. So what is it? Are you mimicking success? Are you mimicking failure? Right? So that you mimic something. It's like, in policy, public affairs, people talk about policy borrowing, policy transplantation. So I give the example, you go to Tanzania, rural Tanzania, and the World Bank has implemented something that's funded a project there, and it's Blossom is doing well. Oh, you say my work in Lofa County, Nimba County, Liberia, rural Liberia, Bomi County, you bring it home. Without taking into consideration the holisticness, sort of the nuances of the culture, the custom, and the context, right? Policy planning and happens in context. So you mimic something you saw that was successful in someplace else, you bring it here, but you do not have the state capability to implement effectively what you are mimicking, right? So you have the trappings of mimicry, but you do not have the capability to address or to, in a sustainable way, what is it that you are mimicking, right? So it's both on the donor side, but it's also on the government side, because we are aid dependent. Let's face it, we are an aid dependent country. We have not been able to move our budget from $500 million to say $1 billion through domestic revenue mobilization, through improving our export earnings, just really developing our macroeconomic space to be able to grow what economists call national accounts, right? So the totality of production in our country and in the totality of the abilities of our people to produce and engage in the marketplace. We are a country that is struggling along those the macro indices. And sometimes, our officials who are training these things don't really explain it to us, because that's the negative side of things. It doesn't make the government to look good. But there's a lot to work on in terms of seeing, you mentioned the Bridges School. I disagree with Minister Werner when he was in office. You cannot mortgage all of our elementary education sector to some private company. They say publicly funded, privately managed. The Bridges School, they don't employ our teachers. They bring their own teachers sometimes who are not even trained, they don't follow our curriculum, who don't know our culture, don't know our system. And then we mix up our education system. We have different things happening, confusing our children. Meanwhile, our government is paying them millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. That is just an example, right? That I totally disagree with that. We saw that in Uganda and in Kenya. They went and brought it to Liberia. British were kicked out of Uganda. They will probably call me up, but that is the truth. The records are there, right? And so we have to be careful. As poor as our country is, if we have the right people in the right places, we attract the right talents to work towards specific identified impacts, I think that we can do better than the rate at which we're going right now.
I believe that too. And that's why sometimes we do this program not as a critique on government, but to say, hey, the opportunities are here. We as diaspora Liberians, there are people that are willing and ready, even today, to go back and work for free.
Absolutely.
People appear on this program, say, I have asked the government, not just this government, but the government before, that I want to go back every semester when there's every summer to go back and teach for free. All I want them to do is just recognize it.
To have the system in place.
And you don't have to pay me. You don't have to transport me. Just have something in place. So let's go to our viewers. They are commenting now. Or Wesley Miller say, I want to say thank you for your good work. I think that's you.
All right.
Mohammed Saria Dukle say, great analogy. I think when you talk about a symphony.
Okay.
We have a long one from Alex Red. He say, are you saying that governance is sort of managing policies to translate into becoming reality to benefit the people and society as a whole? So then government has more to do with public structure with different functions that put together policies to fuel governance or operational aspect of these policies? A loaded question there. Jot it down.
Right.
Let me go to Alex's next question, and then you can respond. Isn't it challenging to divorce politics from governance or government?
Okay, thank you. So I will start with Alex. This is, a very good, brilliant Liberian mind. Yeah, listen, he's right. So politics and governance and government, they appear to be synonymous and analogous to one another. And you can argue, it's too simplistic to say that government is just a collection of people and institutions and structures, right? Because government is more than that. Government is clothed with the constitutional authority, the laws and regulations. They put together all kinds of but when you start going to constitution, you start going to laws and administrative law and regulations and rulemaking and things like that, then you go into the realm of governance. So my point is, I stress that to say that when we are composing government, let's be mindful of why we want a government. We want a government for governance, to do the things that you need to do that Alex mentioned, policies and structures and standards and principles to produce the greatest good for our people, to produce impact that will be able to advance lives and advance socio-economic well-being of our people. So yes, you're talking about structures, you're talking about policies, you can go at a technical level, but you also can go at a policy level, at a political level, and at the executive, different branches of government. You start coming to say, okay, we're separate but co-equal branches of government. Who does what and who doesn't do what? All of them together are working towards collective action success, not collective action failure. In terms of Mohammed Salia, thank you. I appreciate the kind word. What was the other one? I think that other one was just a compliment there, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I will say about these.
Yeah, Wesley, say thank you for your good work. And then
thank you, Wesley. I appreciate your
there's another question here about any relationship with President Sirleaf. You say, who's your mom and dad? Because I hear you say Sirleaf.
Well, I am a Sirleaf, so I will get in trouble with my other Sirleaf cousins. But I always say that she may be related to me, but I'm not related to her. And they don't like that answer, because then I'm saying, listen, she's a Johnson. She was married into our extended family system, which is not my mother. I respect her, but there are areas that we've disagreed many times.
Hamilton Zilli, the idea of policy formulation is not really the problem in Liberia. The fundamental problem has been the lack of political commitment to act accordingly. Yeah,
so there's that big catchphrase that people say, political will. the political will. What does political will mean? What does political commitment mean? Right? So to me, yes, you could say, listen, when people engage in rent seeking, which is I'm only here to maneuver and do things that at the end of the day will benefit me, my friends, and people around me. The office you hold, you essentially use that office as a business shop for yourself to advance yourself. That's, those who went to economic school will say rent seeking, right? And then you're not politically committed to understanding and advancing the common good. To produce the greatest good, to move your country from point A to point B. Because there are people who, development economists who can calculate actually how Liberia will look like in 100 years at the rate at which we're growing. And so we look at that and say, what, you're telling me Liberia will still be looking like that? So what is it that we're doing wrong? How do we get there? Well, we have elected officials who are there to represent us, because we're a representative democracy, right? That when they say political commitment is something. Every reform is a beautiful joining. It's not an, just snap and do a thing. It's a process. But and again, what the folks at the Canada School say, wicked public problems. How do you tackle public problem? I think that political commitment, when they talk about is budget law, allocating resources, agreeing to advance a particular problem on the policy agenda and move it along to implementation, monitor, and see how well it has done. But there are different inferences and different actors playing out here in the policy arena, right? They will have multiple different motives. So sometimes a particular policy that may be popular with some charismatic public official may not be what the rest of the people want, and it may not be advanced. So a political will, again, to me, is a little nebulous term. People play with in different ways, but the commitment, political commitments, it just means, okay, let's do it. We can do it. Let's get to work.
Right. And Danny Phillips say, I hear you, my son. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. Thank you.
Jerome Gilman, why do we have implementation deficits?
Well, okay. So it's a good question. There's a thing called state capabilities. I alluded to that earlier. And the state capability trap, which means just like a human being, right? So my father used to say there's 3 stages in life, right? So when you're growing up, you're a young boy, young girl, you want to go to school, you want to succeed, you have this youthful exuberance. That's your plan right there. And then you succeed, you finish school, you have your career, you're at the peak of your career, you're making money. Now money is not your problem, house is not your problem. You can do what you want to do. So that's the second stage. What is the third stage is self-actualization. Now, how do I positively impact people around me? With my knowledge, with my skills, with my expertise, with my resources, right? Similarly for state, so then you have capability, right? Say you are educated, you have specific skills in your discipline, in your field, in your chosen career, right? So what does our country have? What are those capabilities? Does our country have human capacity, which we do? We do have people. We have people in Liberia who are trained and educated, who can move things forward. We have people in the diaspora, right? We have natural resources. We always talk about how rich our country is in terms of natural resources, but we're not properly exploring and exploiting them. I agree, but there's some caveat there. And then, so what do we understand as our productive capacity, as our power as a nation to move a piece of policy or a piece of reform agenda ahead with our people on board, with local ownership, with national ownership, knowing that at the end of the day, if we engage in this difficult but necessary reform, we're actually going to advance our country from point A to point B. So I think that there are a lot of conversations that have to happen, a lot of work to have to happen. We have to depoliticize some things because Liberia shouldn't be where it is, my brother. I mean, when you go home, I lived there for 6-7 years, recent time. I'm not putting my own country down, but again, you travel in the region, countries of the same size, countries of similar characteristic. Then you look at national, international indices, the Human Development Index. You look at governance worldwide in the index that the World Bank uses. we are way, way, way down there. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we want to continue doing these things that we've done for the last 173 years and expect different results? Or do we want to think outside of the box and engage in meaningful and complex dialogue and thinking and move swift things around a little bit and to see whether we will be able to advance to another point where that's been elusive to us?
Talking about statecraft, and I want us to conclude with this because I've heard many things about what Liberia's problem is and how people want this to be solved. Here's some of the things that I hear.
Okay.
Country is a good country. The only thing that is killing us is corruption. As long as we can stop corruption, boom, we're there. Some will tell me Liberia has one of the best laws. The laws are on the books, but the implementation, that's the problem.
Yes.
Some will tell me, I mean, Liberia is just bad lucky with leaders. We always have bad leaders. Just give us someone like Jerry Rawlings.
Yes.
I also hear, and that was reflected in the PRS, the problem, what caused the war and institutional failures. And so as a result, institutional failure continue to be our problem. From your perspective, public service, we're talking about public sector governance. Are these people right?
So they're talking about so they're all dancing in mismanagement of statecraft. They're all saying we want our statecraft to work. We want to engage in statecraft. We're yearning for statecraft. That's what they're saying. No, I was on a flight once from Cairo to Monrovia during the Ebola time, and the Sierra Leonean lady who noticed my accent said, "Oh, you from Liberia?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh gosh, Liberia is always bad lucky with bad luck. No, Liberia is always lucky with bad luck." So I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, you guys seem to always have the wrong person or the wrong things happening to you at the wrong time." And so I disagree with that. But all these, I hear this too a lot. People say, "Oh, corruption," and corruption is huge. It's not a Liberia problem alone, but it is endemic and pervasive in our society. Someone told me before, the root of corruption is really poverty. Now, I disagree with that because we can do something about poverty. We do have people, we know how to do something about poverty, right? And so corruption may be behavior change. It may be a cultural. It may be really, because you see if somebody will build a very beautiful mansion in the community, they're the only richest person in that community. They have some kind of poly tank on top of their house. All the luxuries of modernity is in their home, but the road to their house is rocky, and everyone around them lives in the shop. You're not doing well. You're not wealthy. You're really poor. You're suffering yourself. Because until you can improve conditions of people around you, you are not better yourself. Paul Weston, former senator from Minnesota here, used to say, we do well when we all do well. Okay, so we're not doing well on the corruption front. There's a lot we can do there. People say there are good laws on the book. How do we know the laws are good? See, laws are meant to be interpreted, to be tested at the administrative level, right? You can get your administrative rulemaking. These agencies should take a piece of legislation then and break it down within the realm of that legislation. And here in America, if you want to go fishing, for example, you have to have a fishing license, right? You have to have this. These are all regulations. So how do you engage in administrative law and rulemaking, agency rulemaking and regulations and things like that? So maybe that's what they're talking about, that they're there, but we can actually make bad laws that impede and stymie progress. We don't know. We may engage in a piece of legislative action and thinking that this is the best thing for us. That's where you go to really deconstructing the problem, reconstructing the problem, even at a legislative drafting level, to know that the law you're making could actually prevent people from growing. It could prevent the economy from growing. It could prevent all kinds of positive things from coming to the country. So in terms of leadership, bad leaders and all of that, listen, that is something that, is the human capital problem that I talk about. It has to do with behavior change, mentality of our people. What is it that we want? If you look at someone who comes and buys their vote and pays you, bags of rice and whatever, and then they borrow and take loans to run campaign. A friend of mine was running for office, and I tried to be political consultant to him. I talk about fundraising, and he said, "My man, Sirleaf, you thought out in the pool, say you can get money, you want run. They have to see you as the man who is already rich and successful, who's giving them stuff. If you start asking people, I need money to run, then they say, the man, I'm ready yet." So you have to have, what have you done before? You build bridge before, you build wealth, and what have you done for the youth? What have you done for these people? You got to show that you were wealthy previously, you've done some things for them, then they elect you. You essentially bought their vote. You get there, you want to recoup that loss, so that you're not governing, really. It could be anyone. It could be somebody who's just hustling. It was just hustling. Let me tell you, the legislative arena, right? And political appointments and so on. These are the most lucrative employment sectors in our country. A lot of young people are not looking beyond government and becoming representative or senator just because of remuneration packages and so on. They're not looking at the private sector. They're not looking to engage in the private sector, perhaps with their opportunities. I want to go to school. Everybody's learning public administration and sociology, and that's what the young people are learning in Liberia. So what population are you growing? How are you preparing young people to lead what kind of country? If all you think about is I want to run for office because everybody got big cars and they're rich. So that's the problem right there.
Right. We are almost out of time here. One last comment here. First, this comes from Covington DC. Good evening, Ahmed. And from Aliba Kabase, he's talking about the militarization of the youth. And his question basically is, who's responsible for this? Do we blame the youth? Are they liable, or are they victims, or are they perpetrators?
So that's a tricky question. I know, Ali, thank you for that question. We talk about how youth have to bear some responsibilities themselves, because then they have to first realize what is it they want for their future. What kind of family do I come from? What kind of community do I come from? Who are my role models? Who am I learning from? Who are my mentors? And so molding the minds of young people is the responsibility of society at large, especially in our African society, sub-Saharan African context, right? But the young people bear some responsibilities. If you allow yourself to just be pretty single behind someone who will give you $5 at the end of the day, who will borrow you to take you to some meeting to show support, who would tell you that being militarized, being called militant, is the way that you show that you are smart, you are intellectual, you are educated, then that's problematic. On the other hand, responsibilities, the onus is also on politicians, these political party people, these elected people who recruit them, bring them, divide them in districts. They have structure. You may not have proper governance structure or may not be working, but when it comes to electioneering and political party juggling, you have the so systematically organized at district level, community leader, and so forth and so on. And so they have been programmed to participate in the way that they're participating. And so I would say responsibility goes in all kinds of directions at the societal level, with religious community, our clergy, the mosques, the church, the parents, the uncles, our village, and so on. Africa is not Liberia, our context is really anchored on culture and respect for tradition and elders and so on. So it takes so many people to really grow up the person who Ahmed Sirleaf is. It's not just my parents alone, right? Yeah. And so if you see your nephew and nieces going in some direction, they're just going around singing and you say nothing, or you are a political leader, you take advantage of impressionable young people, and you have responsibility. It means that you're not a visionary leader. You're not thinking ahead about how you want your country to look like 100 years from now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sirleaf. If there's one thing you want to leave with our audience tonight concerning statecraft and public sector governance, what would that be for your concluding statement?
It will be a disciplined government. It will be a competent government. It will be approach forming governance not based on sentiment, not based on, everywhere in the world, the political party that comes to office will have to recruit its best. That's because the assumption is you have built institutions over the years, prepared and trained your people to be ready to lead the state, right? If you have problems with skills, You have, because, statecraft, they say, identify an impact that you want, attract talent to that impact, not necessarily for the profit they will make, but because they will leave a greater impact on the society. That's the kind of mindset. So it's behavior change. It's us embracing our diversity as a strength, so that our people know that we're different, but we're in it together, and we can move our country. Liberia is all we have. We can't keep wrangling and be fighting. Then people are more excited about conflict, disunity, political wrangling than some intellectual discussion, or somewhat like what we're talking about here tonight. I'm sure you don't have a whole lot of people following. If you are bringing controversy around politics, you have hundreds of thousands of people following you. Yeah. I say that we have to change the way that we think about our country, we think about families, our society, if we want to be a better Liberia, if we want to be a country to our children and their children that will be better than the one we grew up in, the one we are living in right now.
Sorry, Thomas Brooks said, Liberia's problem is our president. Change has to come from the top. And we've changed president and we don't seem to get it. And then, Willie DeLong said, why are countries like Singapore or China thriving without democracy? Where are we getting it wrong? Do their models show that individual rights and democratic values do not matter? What can we learn from their success and progress? And if I were even trying to answer that, is the whole idea of statecraft,
right,
or good governance is not about the system of government.
But that's what I said. Government is not governance. So Singapore experienced governance. Singapore was a whole project, the Asian project, right? I mean, some Asian countries were poorer than a lot of African countries. Do you know there's this myth that the highest number of poor people are on the continent of Africa? That's false. You go to Southeast Asia, people are still dirt poor there. Go to India, countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and so on, right? So Singapore was a single individual who engaged in, first of all, what I talk about, the power of the state, the tools of state, right? Diplomacy, information, military economics. They engage in information campaign that program their people in a psychological way towards progress, towards prosperity. So they engage in statecraft. They engage in proper governance, understanding their resources, knowing that they have complex public problems that they needed to tackle. And they engage in that without focusing necessarily on political structures, right? They invited outsiders that to help them with this experiment, and it has worked. And so, yes, we want democratic constitutional institutions because you want the rule of law. If you're coming to invest your money in Liberia, you want to know that there's a sanctity of contract, so that if you engage in contract with somebody, they will respect that. If you want to court, you can get justice. You want to know that you'll be safe in our country. You have a voice to engage as a citizen in the public square, in what's happening in your country. So we want all of those principles. They're all good. But at the end of the day, it's about bread and butter issues. It's about how do we get people out of certain abject conditions to better conditions, and confer that dignity, that inborn natural human dignities as human beings. That's what Singapore did. That's what countries like South Korea did. And so there are examples there in the development literature that we can actually point to. We're just a population of, I don't know, now they say 5.1 million, which is about that. We can't even get to $1 billion budget. Here, some small municipality is several billions of dollars. One school district is billions of dollars. So why is it that our macroeconomists in the country can't tell us how can we measure what we have? How can we attract grants, investment? How do we make sure that aid works for us, that we're not aid dependent, we can actually get off of foreign aid? All of these things will take serious thinking, serious conversation, serious soul searching, and action, working, doing it, not just talking, doing things. How do you do it? You have to have expertise, skills, well-trained people, human capacity to blend and couple with our natural and other resources to move the country ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sirleaf, for your time. Coming, we'll just want to give you a brief lineup of what is ahead of us. We have our fashion designer, Maud Siania, who's going to be here tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern or 12 noon Eastern, to talk about fashion design. We also, Saturday, we'll have Senator Balchas or Jonathan Sobey. He's going to be here to talk. He's a former footballer, now a politician and senator of River G. For the entire month of February, we're going to be discussing Liberian history to commemorate Black History Month. This will start with Mr. Josiah Jokai, who's going to be talking to us on the history of elections in Liberia. This Sunday, you don't want to miss it. Again, Mr. Sirleaf, thank you so much for availing yourself.
Thank you, Dennis. I want to thank you and your audience and those who actively participated. We need to keep talking, but more importantly, we need to work and get to work. Respect our diversity, move Liberia together, both at home and abroad. So again, I thank you for this opportunity tonight.
Thank you so much. On that note, I want to thank our audience for staying here with us, and even those who are going to watch later. I want to say thank you so much. Keep it here always. Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberian. We're going to end now with our closing song that says, "We are all Liberian." Whether you believe in statecraft or not, we are still Liberians. You can be on the other side of the political divide. We are Liberians, and we must do whatever it takes to make our country the glorious land of liberty. Good night, and God bless.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.